Bună dimineața, stimați participanți ai briefingului excelenței sale, domnului Valery Kuzmin, ambasadorul extraordinar și plenipotentiar al Federației Rusă în România, cu ocazia Zilei Diplomatului Rus. Briefingul va fi în limbă engleză. La început, domnul ambasador va răspunde la întrebări pe care le-am primit prealabil de la dumneavoastră. După aceasta, mai târziu, veți avea posibilitatea să puneți întrebări suplimentare, apăsând butonul Ridică mână. Îi dăm cuvântul excelenței sale, domnului ambasador Valery Kuzmin.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends. Today we have some time for making a review of a number of your questions. I classify them into two big groups, and I believe that we should start from the bilateral agenda and Russian domestic, so to say, agenda, so that to pass towards the endless theme of international relations, Ukraine, and so on and so forth, if you have nothing against. So, for your better knowledge, as far as we are following Romanian mass media and social media, and see that information on these subjects is either scarce, either very much distorted. I would like to attract your attention to the major results of the past year, 2022, for Russian economy, for example. Against all the alarming forecasts, prophecies, looming prophecies of catastrophe, according to the data of International Monetary Fund, the latest data available, the downfall or decrease in the Russian gross domestic product last year hasn't exceeded, that means that it was a little bit less than 2.5%. Though many, in particular Occidental analysts, politicians, they promised us a kind of a catastrophe of 20% slowdown or something of this kind. The annual inflation has reached 11.9%, and it is expected to go down to the level that it is regularly planned by our financial authorities of 4% during the current year. As a result, deficit of the state budget was within 2.3% last year. Summarizing this block of information, I would say that rumors about collapse of the Russian economy circulated in the West proved to be slightly exaggerated. If we follow beautiful formula invented by Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, American humorist and satirist of the late 19th, early 20th century. Most of those indicators which I have already mentioned are better than results and achievements of the majority of the Western countries, which have openly declared the goal of strangulating, of destroying the Russian economy through economic sanctions. National currency of Russia, ruble, is one of the most stable and reliable, if you like, resilient. This word is very widely used in European Union as an effective term in the world. And for the moment, exchange rate of ruble has stabilized exactly at the level which preceded the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine. It is about 69, 70 rubles for $1 and a little bit more for euro, which now is once more heavy, more valuable than $1 on the exchange markets. To a great extent, this target, this problem was solved thanks to special regulations on procedure of buying and selling, better to say, Russian natural gas for rubles, so that in fact it was proved an evident reality for every unbiased, objective observer, an evident fact that Russian currency is not just a piece of printed paper, but behind it there is enormous potential of natural resources, of industrial production, and other factors that define stability of any currency in the world. The labor market is stabilized. We do not see any considerable or even visible increase in the level of unemployment. Certain sectors of economy, like, for example, construction, agricultural sector, agri-industrial even, I would say, defense, industrial sector as well. Some others have shown very high dynamics through the recent year. To bring you one tangible example, I'm going to quote only one indicator. It was 101.5 million square meters of the living quarters. That means apartment blocks and other kinds of housing have been built through the recent year. This is a record number, 101.5 million square meters, a record level after the dismantling of the Soviet Union. And even at that time, better, I can't speak for the whole Soviet period, but better figures were roughly at the same level. Just a couple of glimpses. For example, the large long-term program of development of atomic nuclear ice-breaking fleet is now unrolling. At the end of the year, a new nuclear moved icebreaker, Urals, started to be operational in December. Next icebreaker of this kind, gigantic icebreaker, I would say, which is called Yakutia, would come in a year and a half, roughly, and enter this fleet, which is now counting for 6, I believe, big icebreakers, and is going to reach 10 in a couple of years. Production of oil increased by 2.5%, reaching 535 million tons. Though production of natural gas went down for 11.8%, overall revenues of Russia from the gas and oil sector increased substantially. As a result, it led for increase of the revenues of the state budget by 10% at least, and those revenues reached the level of 27.8 trillion rubles. At the same time, Russia is not leaving behind or is not denying its own commitments under, for example, UN programs, UN accords in the sphere of slowing at least or decreasing the greenhouse gases emission into the atmosphere. And as an example, I could bring you, for example, Moscow City, which by the end of the last year has introduced about 1,050 buses for public transport being moved by electric engines, electrobuses, buses, if you like, yes. As a result, statistics show that the emission of hydrocarbon and other gases not very good for our health and environment have decreased by 36,000 tons. I believe that it is a respectable achievement as far as the whole Europe is exploiting or using only about 8.5 thousand buses moved by electricity. And every such country like Germany, Britain, France, each of them, they have a little bit over 500 buses at their disposal. Remember that Moscow, the central city of Russia, exploits over 1,000. On the other hand, we can say that the strategy declared by our government for substitution of imports, first of all, those imports that were blocked by the illegal from the standpoint of international law, unilateral sanctions of European Union, of United States of America, was rather successfully carried out, this strategy. And the focus was made on resurrection, if you like, of the civil aircraft construction, construction of the machinery for power plants, some others. And as a paradoxical illustration, I would say, we can say that taking a smartphone with the label made in China, made in People's China, de facto you could find a microchip of Russian production, Russian origin, better to say. And to mention is quite right, would be the Zelenogradsky Micron. This is the name of a big enterprise producing microchips in the suburbs of Moscow, is on the list of 5 largest producers of this kind of exports of this kind of goods in Europe. Coming to the Russian-Romanian relations, bilateral, there is a number of questions on this issue. I prefer to give you the general picture because most of those questions, with all my respect, they are beating about the bush and in fact do not touch upon the substantial points, substantial issues of our current relations, neglecting which would bring us nowhere. First of all, Romania has joined and supported all the anti-Russian sanctions, illegal, as I have already mentioned, in the light of the international law, because legal sanctions under operational international law could be introduced only by this decision of Security Council of the United Nations. And there, you know the situation. Evidently, none of those sanctions have got any blessing from the Security Council. As a result, by special decree, executive order, if you like, of the government of Russian Federation, Romania was put on the list of unfriendly states towards the Russian Federation. At the initiative of Romanian leadership, practically de facto, the political and diplomatic dialogue between our countries is now on the pause mode, if you like. In fact, realization implication of a good number of the articles of the Russian-Romanian, as we call it, political big treaty, which is called Treaty on Cooperation and Friendly Relations, which was signed and ratified back in 2003, they are not working. They are not practically applied. Intergovernmental Commission on the Economic, Scientific Cooperation is not working for years, and recently no progress has been achieved. During the year, about a dozen, even over a dozen of diplomatic and technical members of the staff of our embassy were declared persona non grata and expelled from Romania. There was an unhappy episode when a car full of canisters with fuel made an attempt to break our main gate of the embassy. Thanks God, it led only to a single loss of life of the driver of that car. Nevertheless, all those things, all those facts and events, they are not, it is not possible that they do not influence the state and the tone and style of our bilateral relations. Evidently, one of the major negative factors is more and more restrictions introduced on the Russian business. Recently, we hear once more a story about Petrotel Lukoil allegedly having not paid some taxes or God knows what. I arrived here about 7 years ago. And one of the bad news that I faced here, it was that our major investor here in the Romanian market, Petrotel Lukoil, that means branch of the Russian big international private oil and gas company, was under some legal procedure, facing some legal procedure, some investigation. Then a couple of times investigation was closed because there was no evidence of any breaches of law. Now we hear the same story with slight differences, slight amendments in formulas and so on and so forth. So I have full right to be very doubtful about the real situation as it is characterized by Romanian mass media and authorities. In many cases, in particular in the first half of the year, later some questions were a little bit better settled than at the beginning, but they continue from time to time. Many restrictions. Russian citizens, people legally being legally residents in Romania, but originating from Russia, our embassy, till quite recently, a few days ago only, we seemingly found solution to the evident and natural settlement of the evident and natural need of our embassy for regular financial services from banks here. As for the private people, private citizens, they are facing such problems almost every other day. They are denied to be served in a proper and undiscriminatory way by the banks. They have problems with their banking cards and so on and so forth. Evidently, it doesn't pay to improvement of the atmosphere of our relations. More than that, I'm now answering some of your questions. Some deviation or non-compliance with decisions of the European Commission on anti-Russian sanctions have been made a criminal deed which should be punished by means of the criminal code in Romania as well as over Europe. Is it encouraging for increase of business activities in finding new spheres of cooperation, trade? I doubt it. Though the overall commercial turnover between our two countries last year in 2022 hasn't suffered visible changes. By evaluation, by forecast, if you like, of some analysts, it has already, because we are now in February of the next year, but the final figures are not available. Approximately, it reached the level of 5.5, that means $5.5 billion. As far as starting from December, new restrictions, new sanctions were introduced by Brussels, by the European Union on imports of Russian oil in different spheres. Later, there were more restrictions on all kinds of oil products, fuel in particular, and so on and so forth. We can't expect that this figure would stay unchanged and wouldn't feel that pressure, downwards pressure of all those measures. Though in the past year, it was interesting to fix that within the overall turnover, for example, Russian oil and products of oil increased their share in that overall volume of our trade from 20 to 25%. All in all, I can say that, of course, it is my non-professional evaluation, but I rely upon the opinion of professionals, majorly that relative increase in the in commercial turnover is a result of evolution of the oil and gas prices, which were through the largest, the biggest part of the last year, were very high. And as a result, it is not about the quantity, it is about the price. In particular, we shouldn't forget that Russian Federation as well undertook certain response measures in response to those sanctions. And as a result, not only the volume of certain items of Russian exports, but as well of import of foreign goods into Russia from Romania as well, has decreased. Russian government introduced some higher customs payments and banned import of certain categories of goods. As a result, including some goods produced in Romania, like pharmaceuticals, like products of wood and timber, like electric equipment, and in particular, that Renault big plants which had been operational in Russia before, they have closed up as a result, imports of necessary, как будто, I don't know, those parts and parts of those cars that were imported from Romania, in particular, to Russia, to be assembled there in the Russian Federation. They are not now sold. This item of the imports is non-existent on our list. And experts, they see that any restrictions that have been introduced towards Russian produce or towards Russian services for Romanian market, whether it was in the sphere of export or import, they were followed by extra expenses for Romanian economic operators, which is indirectly proved by the decrease of industrial production in Romania by 1.8%. Generally, it is, of course, approximative, not completely final and comprehensive evaluation, but approximately the supply chains involved in those operations of import, export, and producing of relevant goods were destroyed, touching produce of about $200 million all in all. This is briefly the account which I have for you, reflecting most of the questions on these and related subjects that we have received. As for such questions, how do you cope with, or how do you deal with Romanian politicians and so on and so forth, I would like to leave for our next briefings, next press conferences. As far as at the background of this picture, general picture, I believe you have more or less already clear enough impression, clear enough picture of what is going on. Though we believe that still our economies remain complementary, some big trade routes are changing their geographic location now, and after, for example, evident terrorist act against two Nord Streams in the Baltics, there would be, and some steps are already scrutinized, there will be change in the emphasis in the major floods, major directions of the gas and oil trade all over Europe and in a larger part of the world. But it is going well beyond our sphere of responsibility, our expertise. Let us leave it to better professionals in those fields than we are. So another block, major block, the second one, there will be no third one if there will be no extra questions, is about all those events and trends, new trends, some maybe analysis related to the issue of special military operation of Russian Federation in Ukraine and related agenda. I'm sorry, but I have to start at least from January 2014, because even dealing with not only well-informed, but in fact highly professional politicians experts in the international law here in Romania, I find that what is it? Выскочило из головы это самое заразное заболевание, как infectious disease of infectious disease of selective amnesia or selective memory has already overwhelmed and encompassed to a great extent Romanian political elite. I'm not speaking about, I don't believe that we need to argue whether the crisis started, I don't know, last February or a year before when there was another military alarm, as it would have been said somewhere in the 19th century, when Ukrainian troops were concentrated around Donbass. I remember it very well. And the Russian Federation was blamed for planning regular military maneuvers in the southern and central military districts, as if it is concentrating troops around it. I remember it very well. And then finally, the other side, I do not distinguish very much between Ukrainian side and the West, like NATO or leading powers of NATO. The other side considered it wise not to go on. Last February, they changed their mind. They started not only concentrating troops around two republics at that time, Donetskaya and Luganskaya republics, but they started just primitive, massive, daily shelling of the residential quarters, critical infrastructure. For the population of those regions, there was nothing new in it. They suffered from such shelling through previous 7.5, 8 years. At the beginning, in January, February 2014, there was illegal anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev. There was invented a new position. It is interim president, and so on and so forth, or caretaker president, not available in the Ukrainian constitution, and many others. And very soon, against the same constitution, regular armed forces were sent to the east of Ukraine, into Donbass, allegedly to fight terrorists. And we have now available many video clips and sujets showing situations, episodes when peaceful civilians, armless completely, being dressed in the civilian clothes with no arms in their hands. They tried to, or made attempts to stop those armored vehicles crusading the streets of the towns of the east of Ukraine. Very soon, of course, there was a sequence of some events. The very coup d'etat produced, I would say, shocking impression, first of all, in Crimea, which was an autonomous region in Ukraine at that time. Because immediately after that coup d'etat, Ukrainian parliament, called Rada, started to prepare a new law banning use of Russian language all over the country, in spite of all international commitments of Ukraine, according to the conventions of the Council of Europe on national minorities and national minorities languages and so on and so forth. Against previous legislation, which allowed Russian language a status of a regional language in a number of Ukrainian territories, provinces, if you like. because Ukraine is not a mono-ethnic state, and if it claimed to be democratic, there was a wide range list of means and practical experience all over the world. Take Switzerland with 4 official languages. Take Transnistria with 3 official languages. we could find easily many other illustrations. Nevertheless, Kyiv made his choice in favor of a military solution, and completely demagogical, completely cheating, deceiving strategy that was chosen by, at that time, presidential candidate and very soon president-elect Petro Poroshenko, who claimed that I am for peace, it is not a great problem to restore peace in Donbass and so on. Immediately was followed by escalation of all kind of punitive operations, purely terrorist in the style of Second World War, punitive units of local police and SS of special formations of Nazi Germany army were just carried out as if it is something really endorsed by the Charter of the United Nations. It became daily practice. And evidently in this situation, not to speak about those, for example, participants of Maidan in Kyiv, and there had been a tradition of convening such people's informal assemblies to discuss different questions and issues of the Ukrainian domestic politics. The delegation from Crimea were intercepted as an enemy convoy. A number of people just disappeared after that. A number of people now is established as being killed, and so on. So in Crimea, it was clear, where Russian population was over 80%, it was clear that no borscht, no soup could be prepared with this government in Kyiv. So already in April, May of 2014, people's referendum were carried out, not only in Crimea. In Crimea, it took place a month or something earlier. But in Donbass, in Donetsk, in Lugansk, and the results of those referendums were quite evident and outspoken. It was not like 90 and more percent like in Kyiv, but it was overwhelming in the roundabouts of 70 plus minus percent in favor of reunification with Russia, of special, for as a minimum, a special status of those regions within Ukraine, because otherwise it would have been a kind of, if you like, maybe it is not, of course, correct to say it, a kind of a national suicide for them. But what followed, which is now denied by the whole Europe and the United States, with a couple of their vassals in the Far East, there was practice of genocide, of all kind of repressions against civilian population of those regions. Partially, they remained occupied by the Kyiv forces, and in particular neo-Nazi battalions, so-called, like Azov, Aidar, Kraken, Right Sector, so-called, and others. They were in fact behaving themselves like Nazi punitive units through the Second World War in the occupied by Germany territories of Ukraine. And not to see it, it is really a paradox of the side, political side of the West. And in this regard, one phrase of current German Chancellor Olaf Scholz about that it is ridiculous to speak it. You see, it doesn't even deserve any criticism. It is beyond any logic, beyond any democratic human rights. So, Russian Federation played consistent role trying to find a way out. Rebellious population of Donbass, two Donbass republics, they too come. They were simple miners and workers having their special sense of honor and self-respect. They were not to capitulate in front of those neo-Nazis. They took arms, and twice they faced an overall catastrophe. At first, in September 2014, they were encircled around the city of Ilovaisk, and only intervention at the request of the Western politicians, Western leaders, intervention of President Putin, contributed to find some way out. The encircled Ukrainian troops that were doomed for extermination, they were let to go. It was not enough. Ukrainians introduced new forces and resumed the offensive. As a result, towards January, early February of 2015, situation was repeated in the roundabout of Debaltsevo, another town in Donetsk Republic. And the outcry repeated. How? No. Russian Federation, its president, not only negotiated release the second one, release of encircled Ukrainian troops so that to avoid unnecessary victims. But we proposed to resume talks in Minsk and to put down on paper a plan, a roadmap of democratic, political, peaceful settlement of all those contradictions and problems in Ukraine. And it was negotiated together by German Chancellor Angela Merkel, French President François Hollande, President Poroshenko of Ukraine, and Putin himself was participating in those marathon-long negotiations through the night. And the result was really very, very impressive and very, I would say, effective if all the parties involved would have honestly willing or would honestly respect and implement that plan, so to say, on the ground. It was endorsed by Security Council of the United Nations by a unanimous vote. Nowadays, some Romanian politicians and international law experts, they say, well, what was it? You invaded Ukraine in February 2022. It is evident aggression. It is indisputable. Dear friends, the war started at least in spring 2014. This is an established fact. If you don't like it, I can understand it. But the problem is that there was Security Council of the United Nations that couldn't act under certain, I don't know, drugs or under certain hypnotic influence of extra senses or God knows what. It convened. It studied the document, printed on paper, signed, by the way, by the leaders of the rebellious republics, if we call them informally now, like that, from Donetsk and Donbass. So you deny or you insist that Security Council convened, discussed, and unanimously approved a document which automatically became a piece of international law according to the legal framework of our modern world. So what they were doing there, is it ridiculous to speak about those facts? It is absurd to deny those facts. And in fact, this is the, if you like, the genesis of the current situation. Later situation only deteriorated gradually, not on all the vectors of events, not in every sphere of life, but generally deteriorating. Current President Zelensky made an electoral miracle when he came to power under the same slogans of peace, immediate peace, defeating his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, claiming that he is going, that Zelensky said in the stadium, very memorable episode through the electoral campaign, on the stadium facing Poroshenko, he said, "I am your verdict, you're a corruptioneer," and so on and so forth. Yes. What happened later? I'm not going to just get drowned in all those details which are available. For me, clear and easy to remember, but passing by many details will come for last, not even last December, it was early. Petro Poroshenko started to confess that he signed Minsk Accords number 2, as they call it, Minsk 2, in 2015, just to buy time. At first he said to buy at least 4.5 years, that means the duration of his own presidency. Later he changed his mind and said to buy at least 8 years of time to strengthen Ukrainian defense, its defensive muscles, and so on and so on, to prepare for the war. And all of a sudden, last year, the same confessions were made by both Angela Merkel and François Hollande. So it was a big cheat, campaign of misleading, disorienting not only the public in Ukraine, for example, which were striving for peace. Voters elected Poroshenko and Zelensky, first of all, because they declared their peace program. For those intentions allegedly existing, they were chosen among other candidates. So not only Ukrainian voters were deceived. The whole international community in this regard, it is adequate definition, because it is about UN Security Council. United Nations is the only universal organization representing all the geographic regions of our planet. And in fact, it was a lie and deceit of the whole international community. Well, what can I say? As a result, about military alarm in 2021, we have already spoken a couple of words. As a result, towards the end of 2021, Russian Federation, after a couple of rounds, by the way, of negotiations with the American new administration of President Biden, came to a conclusion that something should be done, that negative trend of not only expanding NATO eastwards towards our borders, who is not quite well briefed in geographic realities, I recommend to take a geographic map and find the borders between Warsaw Pact and NATO before Warsaw Pact was disbanded, and now Russian borders and NATO borders after expansion of NATO. We were blamed, systemically blamed for threatening borders of the NATO states. I couldn't find more absurd accusation, but it was pronounced many times. More than that, even understanding that formal incorporation of Ukraine into NATO would be not very plausible development from several standpoints of view, they just started to introduce their military infrastructure to the territory of Ukraine. For Russian Federation, there is no difference drastic difference between those two trends. And I can tell you that the trend was not only just a series of declarations, it was a practical policy followed by the major members of NATO, first of all, United States, Great Britain, some others. In Ukrainian territory already were built reconnaissance and some other military installations. Training of Ukrainian army became a mass phenomena. It was not just a couple of instructors visiting on the occasion of military maneuvers some units in Ukraine or exchange of visits between officers and so on and so forth. And military equipment starting from, I remember very well discussions whether lethal or not lethal weapons should be or allowed to be handed over to Ukraine. What we see now, already evidently offensive kind of weapons, tanks, heavy tanks, are already blessed. They are already starting to come, or at least being prepared to for transportation to Ukraine. So you can find many other indicators that all those trends only aggravated. And as a result, we shouldn't forget that in December 2021, Russia, after a series of attempts to relaunch substantial negotiating process, presented to Washington and to Brussels, to headquarters of NATO, two draft agreements. Their meaning could be formulated very easily. It was two treaties for legally binding obligations, commitments for respect to the interests or to guarantee national defense interests of Russia in the situation when NATO was just knocking on our door. It was exactly the expression or comparison used by our president. He said they were just pushing us against the wall at our doors. We had no chance to retreat, no space to retreat. What was the reaction of the West? If you follow press conferences and other interventions of our minister and President Putin, they explained it more than once. Our initiative, our serious intent to start negotiations were just brushed away. We saw by mid-January last year that the West, the NATO, the United States, the leading power at the head of those alliances, they do not want any serious negotiations. And if you don't mind, I would like to remember that exactly in January 2022, more than a month before special operation was launched, in American Congress, there appeared a draft law of land lease for Ukraine. Do you remember this minor detail? It was evidently like hasty destruction of a network of biological laboratories in Ukraine. against the rules. Instead of burning that poisonous and dangerous biological materials, they dug it simply in the soil and made all the steps to destroy as many documents as possible. All the same. And from roughly 10 plus minus 2 days of February last year, they started, it is called in military terms, though I am not so strong in military terms in English, in Russian it is artillery preparation. That means that all kind of multiple rocket launchers, artillery pieces, most of them at that time yet of the Soviet origin, Soviet production, they started to shoot and shell and bomb peaceful quarters of the cities and townships and the villages of two republics, now already republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. The leaders of those republics had no choice. They were pushed against the wall. They had no choice. They asked Moscow to open borders so that children and women, elderly, could freely enter Russian territory to avoid extermination, mass extermination in their own homes, in the marketplaces, in the hospitals, and so on and so forth. And they proclaimed their independence, asking Russia to sign treaties of cooperation and mutual assistance. And facing those facts and realities, Russia went towards the desires of republics, and such treaties were signed. And only afterwards, when shelling and bombardment didn't stop, only afterwards, only after warning sent through confidential channels to Kyiv that they should stop it and withdraw from the line. You remember Minsk II? Those who deny that the war started before Minsk II. The first point of Minsk II Accords, approved unanimously by Security Council, was comprehensive ceasefire. And there was another relatively long list of steps and measures to be taken. Even comprehensive ceasefire was never respected by Ukraine, with full connivance of the special mission of the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe, which was allegedly monitoring situation, but in fact feeding Ukrainian forces with reconnaissance information on location of the military units of Donbas militias, and so on and so forth. Beautiful, beautiful picture. And in this situation, of course, you understand that there was no other choice for Russia to intervene, because we have very fresh reminiscences, for example, of ethnic cleansing in Serbian Krajina in 1995, not to speak about 22nd of June of 1941, when Soviet Union was attacked by a large coalition, but spearheaded by the German Nazi army concentrated on our western borders. So this is, so to say, the preface. Passing by, what was the reaction of the West? I have already mentioned. First of all, destruction of Russian economy and weakening Russia by economic sanctions, achieving international isolation of Russia so that it would be boycotted and die, and preferably be dismantled, because to govern, to colonize and to exploit minor emirates, my Arabic friends should be offended, minor kingdoms, small statehoods, it is much easier than to face a global power having a sense of dignity, honor, and first of all, ability for self-defense. So, and of course, very soon, this is the answer to the questions, what Russia needs to start peaceful negotiations? Very soon. Last spring, not now. We started to hear declarations of everybody, starting from Mr. Borrell, let us call him Foreign Minister of European Union, High Commissioner, and so on and so forth, and many others. Only defeat in the battlefield of Russia could lead us, and so on. Ukraine should defeat Russia in the battlefield. How many declarations we have had? And they started exactly when, roughly in the middle of April, a series of Russian-Ukrainian political meetings was crowned in Istanbul by putting on paper a kind of a draft political document to settle the crisis. Immediately, at that time, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Boris Johnson, paid a brief visit to Kyiv, and immediately Ukraine disavowed that text, declared that it has nothing to do. Kyiv declared that it has nothing to do with the draft that the Ukrainian delegation presented for further discussion in Istanbul. And those formulations of defeating Russia in the battlefield and so on started to pour out of fake and lie imperial or Western mass media, like lava from volcano. This is the sad logic of the situation. Let us make very brief evaluation of what happened later. Gradually, there were some advances, there were some setbacks, passing by the details of the military operations and hostilities. Coming to June, when there were two rather symbolic events that took place, summit of NATO in Madrid and the summit of BRICS countries. You know what is BRICS? Which was half online, half offline, majorly online, because of yet operational restrictions, anti-COVID restrictions in China. And China was, if I'm not mistaken, it was China exercising the functions of the chair of BRICS last year. What was the outcome? Dry residue of all the eloquent, demagogical, and so on rhetorics in Madrid and around Madrid. They were defined two major threats, risks, under slightly different formulations, but for any serious politician, it was clear what was it about. Russia and China, they are presenting fatal risks, systemic shocks, God knows what. You should understand, first of all, to the United States of America and to NATO. More than that, NATO declared that it is going to expand the sphere of its responsibility into Indo-Pacific region. Take the map of the world, and you'll find, if you look in the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific, you'll find that is the whole world. Mostly in the northern hemisphere, but nevertheless, it is the whole world. So NATO proclaimed its global responsibility. So it was not only expansion eastwards to encircle Russia, but now it is going to encircle, to strangle the whole world in its brotherly, what is it? Not handshake, embrace, yes, embrace, exactly. Okay, so in the summit of BRICS, there was a big declaration adopted speaking on the multipolar world, new global order based on multipolar model, about free, globally free economic, trade, scientific cooperation on the basis of not unfair competition, but on freedom and encouragement of free exchange of goods and technologies and so on and so forth. And I would say that a couple of other points were mentioned at that time. For example, abandoning the previous pattern of major global financial exchanges and changing the character of the international financial system, moving towards settlement of the accounts in the national currencies. As well, idea of enlargement of BRICS was launched, and it is now scrutinized in the relevant quarters. Do you see any difference between those two programs of Madrid NATO program and BRICS program? I do see. And Russia was one of the leading members, active contributors to all those documents and all that, if you like. It is not new, in fact, but constructive and looking into the future philosophy of international relations. Very nice. Another set of events. In September, there was 22nd summit of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or Shanghai Organization for Cooperation, in Samarkand, in Central Asia, in Uzbekistan. As well, our president visited, together with a number of leaders in this time, offline, visited Samarkand. There was a series of talks between leaders of Russia, People's China, India, Pakistan, some others. There was a complex plan. It is a kind of a roadmap of definite points, of definite plans and arrangements to realize long-term neighborhood and cooperation agreement, which is signed between the members of Shanghai Organization for Cooperation, including some measures to change the mutual financial relations from going through dollars to going to national currencies. Or maybe, by the way, recently I've heard that within BRICS, for example, a topic of joint currency to be introduced sometime later as well is now scrutinized. So the same idea. Iran was formally, after signature of special memorandum, was formally accepted as a member of Shanghai Organization for Cooperation. Very briefly. So what was the reply of the West? They blew up 3 out of 4 pipelines of Nord Stream natural gas pipeline in the Baltics. Till now, though from time to time they come back to that. Very recently, notorious Victoria Nuland in the hearings, during the hearings in American Congress, in fact, recognized that it was America, if not a direct side that really put the explosives under those pipelines, but at least was a sponsor and was a major beneficiary of that. It was said almost openly. More than that, very soon there was a terrorist act on the Crimean, so-called Crimean Bridge, which was built between the Northern Caucasus and Crimean Peninsula by the effort of Russian Federation for many purposes. In particular, for example, to stop genocidal practice of cutting off from the population of Crimea the major source of potable water. Look into the documents of the United Nations. To deprivation from the sources of water is one of the aspects of genocide. And so on and so forth. Many things. It was very positive, very peaceful. By the way, plans to build such a bridge have been existing for about a century and even more. So, this was on the 8th of October. What was it? First of all, it was reaction for the people's referendum in three regions of three former Ukrainian regions, already declared independent Donetsk and Lugansk republics, and neighboring Kherson and Zaporozhye Oblast regions. In all four of those subjects, those territories, entities, population overwhelmingly voted for reunification with Russia. And the Russian Federation, in the situation when people there, in reality, faced almost immediate threat of the massive extermination, Russian Federation have taken necessary legal arrangements and all the procedure of incorporating those four regions as full-fledged, full rights regions of Russian subjects of Russian Federation were carried out, and they became full-fledged members of the Russian Federation, Russian territory, which is sacred according to our constitution, by the way. And the immediate reaction of West and Ukraine, it was a very complicated, sophisticated operation through which they brought explosives, misusing that so-called foodstuffs, grain, peace corridor, transportation through that. There were some NATO countries included as a transit country. So, to pass by many details, explosives were brought to the bridge from the Russian side, not from Crimea, but from the mainland Russia side. What was it? And only afterwards, they started massive but very high precision strikes on the critical infrastructure in Ukraine, like electric power stations, railway depots, of course, enterprises and repair units dealing with the military equipment, only afterwards. This is the best answer about what was the reason for millions of Ukrainians to look for refuge, to run away, not from massive Russian bombardment. If you take statistics, you'll find, even local Romanian statistics, that over 2/3, if not 3/4 of total number of Ukrainian refugees or runaways from Ukraine, they left Ukraine in spring, early summer. Recently, yes, there was some slight increase. Relatively, not to speak about that, some of them, they came back, returned back, and so on and so forth. I am not going to underestimate the gravity and seriousness of this problem, but it is a fact. So, and the final touch to that comparison of the two agendas, agenda of NATO and agenda of Russia, G20 summit in Indonesia. How many efforts were taken by the West not to allow Russia to be present, not to allow Russia to speak, not to allow photographing photos with, it was our minister Sergei Lavrov, at the head of our delegation, not to leave even photos. As a result, it became clear. Participants in that group, they were not, if you like, concentrated only on the confrontation and insisting on one and the only one point of view. They said that we have majority of those G20 members. We have our own position, and both opinions were quoted in the final document of this G20 summit. And most of all, the evident conclusion that could be drawn from it, it was that Russian Federation in no way has been isolated internationally. Nowadays, our minister is continuing going through the second leg of his tour of Africa. The first one was a couple of weeks ago. The second one is unrolling now. And believe me that it is very, very, I would say, symbolic indicator showing the real situation in the world. This is why I would like to answer a couple of questions in particular. Millions of Ukrainians left their country to find refuge from bombing. If tomorrow you'll meet a family of such refugees, what you would say to them? This is a question addressed to me. Partially, I have already answered to this question. I have given the answer to this question, but I can say that besides those reflections and analysis that shows that first waves of refugees from Ukraine, and they were considered this way in Europe by certain more or less objective observers, they were economic migration waves, because it was a cherished dream of every Ukrainian to get residence in the European Union this way or that way. In Maidan Revolution, one of the major slogans of the revolutionaries were visa-free regime with European Union. Okay, but nevertheless, the question is more serious. So I face a family of refugees from Ukraine. I'll ask them, evidently you have left country last year. That is why I'm sure that in 2019 you were in Ukraine. In favor of what candidate you voted at the presidential elections in 2019, my dear friends? And listening to their answer, there are too many things that could be said. 73% of Ukrainians at that time, at least of Ukrainian voters participating in those elections, voted in favor of President Zelensky. What were his slogans, his promises, pre-electoral promises? I have already mentioned: peace and extermination of, or at least clamp down on the corruption. Yes? So how many times, my dear friends, you would repeat one and the same mistake? The same mistake was committed back in 2014, which we have mentioned today, when Petro Poroshenko came under the slogan of bringing peace to Ukraine immediately, in spite of all those negative developments that had already happened by that time in spring 2014. So another question, which looks to me deserving the direct answer. It is mentioned that our minister Sergei Lavrov said that Russian diplomats prepare some actions to counterbalance, to counteract, to maybe curtail demonstrations in the West related or linked to the anniversary of the beginning of intervention into Ukraine. Has the Russian embassy in Romania something special? Yes, I'm asking. This briefing is one of the major arrangements, something special, because to announce, to make available truth and objective analysis of the real events. It is a special event here in this country. So this is one of our major points that we are planning. We are planning as well to remember our day. It is called Day of Diplomatic Service of Russia, which was launched, by the way. No, today, this year it is not a Jubilee Day year, but about 220 years ago, ministry in Russia was established for the first time, Ministry for Foreign Affairs, not any other, not Посольский приказ, not Collegium, Foreign Collegium, and Peter the Great, and so on. So we are going to explain, we are going to disavow all those lies, sometimes misunderstandings, sometimes flaws, but the major point, major goal of our diplomacy here in Romania in particular is to fight that enormous empire of lie, fake, and distortion of real events, denial of real historical events in favor of some egoistic interests, even not of your own country, but of the global hegemon, which now is escalating on several directions, a kind of a confrontational strategy. For example, how to split the world. Remember, it is very relevant to remember ancient Rome's tradition and wisdoms, like, for example, divide et impera, divide and rule. What to do? Americans suppose that the world should divide between democracies and autocracies. Who is going to define what is democracy? Is, I don't know, some small country in Africa or Russia is democracy or autocracy? Of course, Washington. So you could easily expect very fair, very honest judgment on everything. And authoritarians, you see, authoritarians, they have proved to be more effective in many ways. But no. Maybe it is better for our former American partners to look inside the United States of America and to honestly analyze. Maybe something should be done there so that the bright image of global beacon of democracy would be at least partially repaired. I'm not going to dig into this direction, but in fact, it looks, you see, at least ridiculous. At least ridiculous, not to say more. So, I hope that this anniversary, to finish up with this issue, anniversary, if you like, though it is not a very appropriate word for it, 1 year after the beginning of the special operation would be good occasion to soberly scrutinize, soberly analyze what lessons could we draw from this situation. We shouldn't just play with illusions that it is Russia that is going, that it is warmongering country that is making this conflict to continue, that it is interested in longer duration of it. It is all rubbish. It is all rubbish. It is Zelensky who legally, by his own decree, banned any perspective of negotiations with Russia. Last year, there was a special decree signed by this brilliant politician. So, most popular at least, with the effort of the West, only World Cup, Football Cup, somehow luckily avoided having to listen to his crazy ideas and appeals. So, that's it. another group of questions I would like deserve answering in more detail or dealing with in more detail. It is about eventual application of nuclear weapons, Russian stand on this issue, and so on. And because some questions are formulated like that. Is the Russian Federation going to use nuclear weapons to assert its domination in Ukraine? Dear friends, Russian Federation has no intention to assert its domination in Ukraine. But for sure, we have missed this another rather big topic, the explanation and the elaboration of the aims of the special operation. One of them is demilitarization of Ukraine, not only providing physical safety to the regions, now 4 Russian regions and eastern part of that country. Historically, it was called Novorossia, that means New Russia. Before, it was a step, it was a corridor by which many peoples, many nations arrived to Europe from Central Asia, from Hindustan, from Asian mainland, and so on. So, nukes and perspective of escalation of this conflict towards Third World War, which would be global and most probably would be fatal for the whole mankind, it is really a serious topic to discuss. I would remind you that in Russian constitution, contrary to the military doctrines of United States and in relevant documents of our country, like concept of foreign policy, defensive doctrine, and others, there is no provision that allows any preemptive first strike, that means Russian Federation, for the moment, maintains the policy of no first strike with the use of nuclear weapons. This is our firm conviction, at least for the previous period of time. But we see that situation changes. We have such a formulation as retaliatory preemptive strike. That means that modern means of communication, and we have now a combined global early warning system with the people's China about strategic missile attack. That means that many networks all over the territory of 2 altogether largest countries of the world, they are on Virgil, they are monitoring the outside territory, the outside space as well, to prevent, by warning political leadership, that there is a transcontinental, intercontinental ballistic assault. Whether this provision will be amended in the future, new updated concept of our foreign policy, I can't tell you for the moment. But President Putin has announced that foreign policy concept, or doctrine, if you like, of Russia is now revisited, and certain amendments would be introduced, evidently, as far as situation is changing in many ways. As far as we see that aggressive alliance, North Atlantic Alliance, has already proclaimed that the whole world, roughly, with the relative exception of South Africa, to the south of equator, Africa, maybe Latin America and Antarctica with Australia. The rest of the world is has been declared the sphere of responsibility and operations of the NATO alliance, which hasn't proved anyway as a peaceful, peace-looking, peace-building coalition of states. Not to remember previous historical precedents of its aggressiveness. So modern arms, you know that even if you have to cover thousands of miles on the way to their targets, they now have become more speedy. We have at our disposal hypersonic weapons, and some of our intercontinental ballistic missiles, in particular Sarmat. In Romania, this name, this term should be known. Sarmatians, they are Sarmatians, depends on pronunciation. Long ago, in some prehistoric time, they were living in the roundabouts in Eastern Europe, in particular, here as well. So this Sarmat has, I don't recollect exactly, 8 or 10 warheads. Every of those, and its range is now much larger than previous versions of our intercontinental ballistic missiles, which had about 10,000 kilometers range. This missile has 20,000 kilometers range, and it, at the final stage, it is shooting with 8 or 10, I don't remember exactly, warheads. And every of those warheads could be or could be not, it depends on the particular configuration. Those hypersonic missiles that are already tested in many situations during the military maneuvers, and to a certain extent tested as well in Ukraine. This is the situation, but in no way Russia is looking for any nuclear war. At the same time, we are not going to tolerate that such a threat of different kind, whether it would be conventional arms threat to the political state system as it is formulated in our doctrines. We use nuclear weapons only when there is a real threat to the political state system of Russia. After scrutinizing our history, we came to a firm conclusion that only being a strong centralized state, Russia could preserve and keep its own independence, sovereignty, and freedom. The goals of completely opposite side are openly declared now by alliance of North Atlantic Alliance and the leaders of NATO countries. This is a fact. So I don't believe that such questions as whether Russia feels any threat from Romania in the context of strengthening of NATO presence in the eastern flank, I don't believe that such questions need any answer. I've explained more than once that as far as NATO alliance and Romania as a part of this NATO alliance, acting and doing everything in complete harmony, in complete conformity, and even playing the activist role to introduce something new. Our relation to Romania is the same as to the NATO alliance as a whole. From the beginning, from that time already legendary mythological time of 1997, when Russian Federation, after some years already, post-Soviet, post-Warsaw Pact era, signed so-called Fundamental Act. In Russian it is called, in English I believe it's something very similar. That means a treaty regulating major principles of our relations. There was one clause, not to deploy substantial combat forces along the perimeter of borders. is a paratrooper division, and I don't know, hundreds and thousands of other NATO countries' troops is a substantial combat force. It is up to you to decide. So then, what are the still hidden reserves or some resources still not yet used to reestablish our relations, at least our mutual understanding? We believe that such means and channels, they exist, starting from humanitarian, so-called cultural and other relations. We believe that at least I have glanced into the window and see that snowfall is intensifying. A couple of weeks ago, one of my Arabic colleagues during the reception said, well, there was a heavy snowfall in Kuwait. My immediate reaction was, as a sign of friendship between us. So the snowfall, I suggest to be received as a sign of friendship, as a sign of our Russian open heart. It is not accompanied with severe frost. This year in eastern Siberia in particular, they have registered record levels of cold. It is not up to, it is down to minus 60, 65, and even minus 70 at certain spots of this territory. It doesn't mean that all the world is going to freeze, maybe vice versa, but nevertheless, it is a job just to relax a little bit this atmosphere. So, nevertheless, I believe that there are many points, many common values, many historical traditions that really make us very close nations. We remain neighbors, and we insist that as neighbors, we should constantly bear in mind this fact. And as neighbors who are doomed, we should be guided only by the motives of good neighborhood, of cooperation, of understanding, at least of understanding each other. And everything starts, it is, I believe it is one of the Chinese ancient times philosophers saying that every long road starts from the first step. And moving from relatively modest steps, we could reach very distant target, distant aim. We need goodwill. We are open, and hopefully something would be possible. To be done. Would be possible the coming year, the current year, most probably. Yes. Then there was a question about our minister Sergei Lavrov allegedly expressed неоднозначную, ambiguous reaction to the interview given by Moldovan President Maya Sandu to Politico, well-known, mass media. Mass media what? Mass media organ, mass media source. I would say, I'm not going to quote literally, that unfortunately, who was it? It was Mr. Duda or somebody from Poland who tried to interpret the words of our minister that next aim of Russian aggression after Ukraine would be Moldova. The meaning of the explanations of the ideas expressed by our minister was completely contrary. He said that it looks like the West has chosen, I'm quoting not literally, but a major sense of it, because to dig into all those files and find this quotation, it will take more time. It looks like West misusing situation when at the head of Moldova, now there is Maya Sandu, herself wishing to enter, and so on and so forth, to join Western alliances. It looks like West has chosen Moldova to follow the example, to exercise the same function as Ukraine. What is the fate of Ukraine? You see, it is cannon fodder. Recent American analysis shows that under Kiev regime control, for the moment, there is area populated with at most 20, 22 million people. What does it mean? I'm not speaking about Soviet Ukrainian Socialist Republic, which was inhabited by 50 million long ago, 30 years ago. But relatively recently, at the beginning of this crisis in 2014, estimation of population of Ukraine was between 37, 40, maybe 42 million people. Now, it is a relatively small country. It is, in fact, made a sacred, a sacrifice, a kind of a sacrifice for the case of unholy case and cause of NATO, aggressive NATO alliance. You see? This was the idea of our minister, explaining that it is alarming aspect, but we are aware of it. There was evident indication and finger pointed at the Western intentions and not yet declared openly plans towards Moldova. That's all. Otherwise, we are not looking for any escalation. Escalation, this is the motto of our Western counterparts. If you judge them by their deeds. And if you have any arguments to counter mine, it would be curious for me to hear. Well, as for relations between Russia and NATO and the United States, by different consistent packages of sanctions, member states of European Union, United States and other states have sent a clear-cut warning to Russia that they are against this war. My dear friends, there is no use to answer such questions because from the first letter, it is perverting the truth and real facts. I have quoted to you many people, and you can find those quotations in many sources from many VIP personalities in the European Union and NATO alliance everywhere. NATO has nothing against this war. As far as it is Ukraine that is major sacrifice, major victim of this war. When Ukrainians, though I can tell you that quite recently, more and more information become available, not only about overall casualties, human losses on the Ukrainian side, which was estimated in one case as about 260, roughly, plus minus, I don't know, out of 56 or something like that, about 260,000 military people that died, that were killed in the front line. Not including wounded and so on and so forth, but only total loss of the military force of Ukraine there. And just yesterday, our Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, quoted that according to our estimation, during January, recent month, the total loss of Ukrainian army, loss counted in number of deaths, is about 6,500. And simultaneously, there appeared figures that only Polish, by ethnic origin, Polish mercenaries, number of victims in Ukraine have superseded 2,500 people. Gradually, I am sure that such information would find a way to the public attention and public access. This is very sad statistics of this conflict, and of course, we see no signs of Western position to be changed. Even, unfortunately, it is difficult to translate into English. Literally, it sounds like drama of the resigned goat in Russian. Отставной козы барабанщик. Boris Johnson, leaving his post in shame after multiple lies about those drinking parties through COVID time and so on and so forth, and up to very serious lies on more serious issues, is touring Kiev, and then there come full, almost full, list of the leaders of the European Union and so on and so forth. Who of them said a single word in favor of peace? I can't remember. More than that, they are speaking about sending more lethal arms, more training more Ukrainian military. Though they say that Ukraine is now suffering a real human tragedy because recruitment is exercised in the streets of Ukrainian cities as a kind of chase for any peaceful, defenseless person, despite one's age. Even teenagers, 16, 17 years old, are now sometimes already being captured and drawn for recruitment to the military commissariat, so to say. So, elderly, they do not stop. So, where are the signs that the West is against this war? It is happy with this war. We are not. But we are not afraid of any sacrifice that is needed to guarantee our national security interests in future. This is the situation, yes? Whether the direct conflict between Russia and NATO is possible. In fact, it is already going on, this direct conflict. NATO, till now, has preferred to deny that it is a party to conflict. But if you look at the facts, like the numbers of those killed mercenaries, for example, and many other facts, you'll see that it is not already quite correct. It looks like traffic or the cars are saluting to the snowfall. No, there is some demonstration there in Victory Square. Yes, but snowfall looks beautiful. I like when trees are covered with fresh snow. It looks beautiful. Okay, so there are questions from some individuals who have taken advantage of our announcement, speaking about diplomacy, speaking about maybe some diplomatic ways to surmount modern risks and challenges to global, European, continental, and national security of our countries, I would say that in our embassy there are two busts of prominent diplomats of the last century. Nikolai Tepulevsky and Maxim Litvinov are exposed for some years already. We arranged for that when we celebrated 145th anniversary of diplomatic relations some years ago. At that time, yes, 1934, when our diplomatic relations were re-established after the break up of them after the First World War, was a year when already Hitler was in power for a year. And if you do remember, arriving to power in 1933, in 1938 effectively, 39 for sure, that means only 6 years later, Hitler already started full-scale Second World War, attacking Poland. And 8 years later, take 2014 plus 8 years, Hitler already attacked Soviet Union. That is why, in spite of all the measures undertaken by the Soviet leadership at that time, not to provoke him, panickers, those who were panicking, facing more and more evidence of concentration of German Nazi troops at our borders, they were punished in the Red Army. Up till early morning of 22nd of June, 1941. We are not going to repeat historical mistakes and miscalculations. So, on our side, Russian diplomacy is ready to see any serious proposals. Those 10 points prepared by Mr. Zelensky, I don't know. It looks like, you see, so far from reality that it doesn't deserve even to be discussed. Once upon a time, when our minister was attacked, saying that, look, one of three major aims of special military operation is to provide security to the population of Donbas region. But they are sending, the Western countries are sending more and more longer and longer range weapons to Kiev regime. What to do? Our minister said, it is their problem. The longer would be the range of shots of shelling of Western weapons, further we would have to push the borders, the allowed regions of deployment of those troops. This is the logic. And till now, Western countries, they are not, in fact, come to a reasonable, the only sane conclusion that this is very dangerous road. By the way, as well, referring to some questions, nuclear weapons were twice completely consciously, completely openly, and by the way, without great military need to be used, were used by the United States of America against Japan in August 1945. By now, American fake and lie propaganda has reached in rather, I would say, shocking effect in Japan. In Japan, many school children even do not know who dropped those nukes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some of them suspecting that it was Russian. Russia by that time had a full alibi. We had no atomic bomb in August 1945 at all. First Soviet atomic bomb was tested in 1949, by the way. So, another interesting question, maybe passing by. I am waiting for fresh questions, if you have. Вот это? Ну, так... ну, зачитаешь тогда. Interesting fact that came to the surface about burning some Ukrainian textbooks in Lugansk Republic, People's Republic, which is now subject of Russian Federation. And they are blaming us of following Hitler's tradition. No, my dear friends. Burning textbooks which were prepared in full conformity with their neo-Nazi, anti-human, fascist traditions, notions, philosophy, it is only following the methods of true denazification, which was completely carried in the Eastern Germany, in German Democratic Republic, and was uncompleted in the Western Germany, back there in the 40s last century. And in Ukraine now, they are burning all Russian books, whether it is Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, doesn't matter. Anything printed in Russian, for them it is poison, it is a danger. This is the difference. So, new questions. Yes, of course, our message to the victims of terrible earthquake is a message of solidarity, of compassion. Our leaders, President Putin, others, they have sent their counterparts in Turkey and in Syria, by the way. Syria is touched upon with that earthquake, maybe not so much easier, but really very very heavily. So, unfortunately, it happened that back in the secondary school, for over 5 years after the primary school, I was sharing a desk with my beautiful friend Vladimir Kosabokov. And afterwards, he became a seismologist and geophysicist, specializing exactly. By the way, he has visited Romania for many times within the framework of exchange of experiences. He told me, unfortunately, it is very difficult to predict earthquakes. They say that there was some island scientist or somebody from Northern Europe, maybe. Frankly, I don't remember exactly, but some scientist who allegedly predicted 3 days before the earthquake. It is a beautiful achievement, but you understand that 3 days before, it is not so much. As they explain, it is really, you see, connected and caused. The true reasons is really large-scale movement of those platforms, so-called continental platforms. Anatolian continental and Arabian continental platform, which are making part of, respectively, Asian and European platforms. So it is really large scale and very pitiful. Russian Federation makes all possible, and Romania as well. I've heard already sent a rescue team. Russian Federation deployed there our up to the best international standards equipped and trained and experienced rescue team directly with dogs, with all necessary equipment, including transport and everything. Well, awful disaster. But with the help of many countries, I believe that at least partially the effects will be smoothed a little bit. But you saw the videos. It is off. Any other question?
Could you repeat what was the total volume trade for Russia and Romania in 2022? And what are Russia's objectives for 2023 regarding trade with Romania?
The overall volume of trade for 2022 last year is estimated as $5.5, that means $5.5 billion. There is no final and official statistics for different reasons. For example, Russian side stopped publishing customs statistics from the beginning of the special operation because it could have been and it would be used against our interests if available. So, but nevertheless, there are some indirect methods and experts. It is not my prediction, it is not my evaluation. I rely upon the information collected by my staff from different analytical sources who are speaking about such volume. As for the prospects, it would depend. You see, as far as we see for the moment, what is the trend? The trend is that European Union is not satisfied with shooting itself into its own leg. It wants to shoot something more substantial, like Leo, I don't know what. We can't stop it. And it is working very, very hard on all kind of measures of improving implementation of anti-Russian sanctions, including, I have mentioned already, including the fact that any deviation, not to speak about breach of those sanctions, are now to be treated within the borders of the European Union as a criminal behavior. And it will be punished by different measures, including imprisonment. So what plans could we build for future in such a situation? We will see. I know that generally free market economy, which is still a favorable and favorite for us, and which in fact has been recently denied and undermined by our former American partners. What is switching off cheap natural gas from Russia before all those events? Remember the story of Nord Stream 2. How many delays, how many barriers were built in the way of making it operational to provide cheap natural gas to Europe? It was before. I remember that a special ship which is able to finish up the construction was traveling around the world from the Far East. It was engaged somewhere in Sakhalin in the Russian Far East. And it traveled around Asia, I don't know, Suez Canal, and to reach Baltic and to resume it. Who is to blame? Who is responsible for those delays? And now Americans are selling you liquefied gas at the triple or even maybe 4 times higher price. And by the way, in spite of all beautiful strategic discoveries of European Commission, which some years ago started to fight long-term contracts of supply for gas or oil, claiming that only on the spot market you can find fair price and so on. Both Qatar and America are now telling them we have no extra sources of supply. We need to invest, we need to find more. And if you are really interested in this, then you should sign with us a long-term contract about 15 years operational, for 15 years, so that we can plan investment, research, investment, drilling, extraction, all infrastructure, and so on and so forth. This is natural. This is, if you like, this is life. So I stop at this point because otherwise we have touched upon this issue and nothing substantial could be added. Давай еще. Николай Николаевич, ну давай.
Меня слышно?
Да.
Да. Здравствуйте, Валерий Иванович. Прежде всего, позвольте поздравить вас с профессиональным праздником наступающим.
Спасибо.
Вы нарисовали грустную картину российско-румынских отношений в настоящее время.
Реалистическую картину.
Да, тем не менее грустную. Высланы дипломаты, сокращены контакты. Вообще непонятно, есть ли еще сферы, где сохраняется сотрудничество. С некоторыми другими недружественными странами, с балтийскими, например, уровень дипломатических отношений был понижен Россией. В этом контексте, как вам видится будущее двусторонних отношений с Румыниei?
Haideți să vă încerc să traduc pe scurt întrebarea domnului Nicolae Morozov. Domnul Nicolae Morozov, în primul rând, a felicitat domnul ambasador cu ocazia Zilei Diplomatului Rus. A spus că, după spusele domnului ambasador, această imagine a relațiilor între Federația Rusă și România și Occident în comun nu arată foarte bine și țările baltice au scăzut nivelul de relații diplomatice cu Federația Rusă și cum domnul ambasador vede viitorul relațiilor bilaterale noastre.
Мы смотрим на перспективы наших... After Russian question, I tried to answer in Russian. А может быть и по-русски. Давайте, что, я отвечу по-русски. Мы смотрим на перспективы наших отношений именно исходя из двух главных факторов. Первый фактор, мной уже упомянутый, это то, что Россия и Румыния являются соседними странами, которые обречены быть соседями, а значит, если они разумны, они будут искать пути к добрососедству. Для этого у нас есть договор. Договор 2003 года, о котором я тоже сегодня упоминал, к сожалению, фактически по инициативе или в силу определенных действий румынской стороны не работает. В других сферах какие-то возможности есть. В действительности и экономические отношения тоже, в общем, продолжают работать не так эффективно. Какие-то бизнесы вынуждены были уйти из Румынии, российские. Вот. Кто-то продолжает работать. Все будет зависеть от доброй воли обеих сторон. Никакие двусторонние отношения не могут существовать только усилиями и доброй волей одной из сторон. Так что в этом плане вопросы эти надо задавать румынским государственным деятелям. Мы со своей стороны готовы содействовать тому, чтобы они строились по-прежнему на равноправной основе и носили взаимовыгодный характер. Что касается, значит, гуманитарных связей, то для них возможностей чуть больше. И если мы хотим сохранить, так сказать, достойный уровень взаимопонимания, эти связи сейчас нужно поощрять. Каковы бы они ни были, будет это обмен какими-то творческими коллективами или, я не знаю, выставками какими-то. Вот. Мы стараемся это делать. Вот недавно провели такой круглый стол, посвященный, фактически научный круглый стол с участием румынских ученых, посвященный 80-летию победы под Сталинградом. Я понимаю, что эта тема для Румынии достаточно чувствительна, болезненна, но тем не менее это был действительно поворотный момент в ходе Второй мировой войны в целом, и он был достоин того, чтобы ему уделить внимание. У нас есть в запасе еще несколько заготовок, в том числе посольство способствует переводу на румынский язык ряда интересных трудов. Вот уже в прошлом году фактически был закончен не только перевод, но и опубликована была книга ветерана румынских исследований, если можно так сказать, госпожи Покивайловой, сотрудницы Института славяноведения Академии наук Российской, которая посвящена судьбе румынского золота в России. Вот. Мы ждем возможности, надеюсь, мы ее найдем, чтобы организовать презентацию этой книги для того, чтобы дать возможность обсудить эту тему, которая обычно вызывала всегда в Румынии такой значительный интерес. Что касается каких-то других вещей, то надеюсь, что что-то удастся сделать еще. Вот сейчас работаем над тем, чтобы попробовать организовать приезд сюда хора духовной музыки, который исполняет, так сказать, репертуар церковный, скажем так, вот. А также фотовыставку, посвященную святым местам России, и, если получится, даже мастер-класс иконописи, школа которой в России сейчас достаточно развита. Получится — хорошо. Не получится — не по нашей вине, заранее говорю. Так? Пока вроде мы готовим это мероприятие. Какие-то другие мероприятия возможны в этом плане. Но многое будет зависеть от общей международной обстановки и, разумеется, от доброй воли принимающей стороны. Мы со своей стороны, например, я как посол могу вам сказать, что на все существенные мероприятия, которые проходят в России, какие-нибудь там, ну, условно говоря, энергетическая неделя там, или Санкт-Петербургский экономический форум, или еще какие-то, мы всегда предлагаем присылать румынских представителей для того, чтобы общаться, для того, чтобы искать, так сказать, узнавать многое для себя новое. Вот. Ну, иногда есть отклик. В последнее время в большинстве случаев его нет. Опять же, не по нашей вине. Поэтому мы не считаем, что все это безнадежно. Мы считаем, что надо продолжать, стараться продолжать цивилизованные дипломатические отношения. Ну, а если, как говорится, наша добрая воля не встретит должного отклика, ну, тогда будут приниматься, наверное, другие решения. Пока ситуация такова, как я постарался вам описать. Пожалуйста, еще вопрос.
Спасибо.
Один. Если 3 вопроса от одного человека, один. Один, выбирай любой.
In 2012, Laura Kadruță-Kövesi participated in the ceremony dedicated to the 219th anniversary of the establishment of the Russian Prosecutor's Office. Now that she has become the chief prosecutor at the European Public Prosecutor's Office, do you think she would make another such a visit to Russia?
This is the question that should be addressed to Laura Kadruță-Kövesi, not to me. If she believes convenient for her to attend such an event, like, for example, celebrating some anniversary in the world of law related to some historic event, why not? But it is up to her. This is a simple and short answer. Что еще? Еще вот от другого человека. Другого нет, все, вопросы кончились. Ну, в порядке доброй воли, давай еще один вопрос от этого и заканчиваем.
Okay. In 2017, Romania was the only country excluded from the negotiations between the European Union and Gazprom regarding the price of natural gas. Do you consider Romania in this context a kind of Cinderella of Europe?
Cinderella of Europe? This Cinderella almost daily reiterates that it is happily independent of or free of the dependence from Gazprom and so on and so forth. Well, if Cinderella prefers to make such declarations, we believe that she, or in this case, it should be used it. It is free to make such declarations. Generally, I can tell you, and I've mentioned briefly, that last year, purchases of fossil energy products from Russia even increased. What is going to happen later, we will see. This year we have relatively warm winter in Europe, for example. The search for extra sources of energy supply and fuel supply elsewhere in the world. By the way, I have mentioned proposal of Qatari authorities to sign a long-term agreement for supply of gas. The same stand, by the way, is followed by American gas companies, because they are, it looks a little bit strange, they have been suffering recently for lack of support from their government, because under the pressure of ecologists and for other reasons, domestic reasons, they were deprived of certain tax bonuses or tax privileges and so on and so forth. And they as well insist that provisional supplies of liquefied natural gas to Europe should be based on a long-term agreement for about 10 years, not less. So we will see. We believe, we hope, and we would like to be sure that reason will prevail. You see, because if you are following all the way only politicized, geopolitically oriented for the interests of some beyond the ocean power policies and practical steps, nothing good is going to come out of it. But we are what it would be properly, historical optimists, if you like. We have historical optimism as one of the components, integral components of our vision and philosophy nowadays. This is our answer. Please, Sean. About national minority in Ukraine, this question I recommend to put to Ukrainian ambassador here. It would be quite relevant. As for me, I can tell you that Russian so-called minority, bearing in mind that over 90% of modern residents of Ukraine, including those who ran away, about 10 million, they are mastering Russian language as their second native tongue since early childhood. It is very difficult to say that in Ukraine, who is Russian or who is Ukrainian. It depends on their self-identification. And nevertheless, recently, the last drop, which is prepared by advanced democratic legislators in Ukraine, is to forbid any personal communication in Russian language, even in private life. Do you see what is the point? The point is that if there is a husband and a wife living in one flat, closing all their windows and doors, try to speak Russian in between, and somebody warn the authorities that they are practicing this, flat could be stormed, they would be arrested and punished. You see, if it is democracy, I don't like it. And I hope that we don't need it, at least in Russia for sure. That's it. We, by the way, we suggested to Romanian authorities more than once, before recent events, before military operation, to undertake collective demarches to make Kiev authorities respect the rights of minorities as they are quoted in the international law documents. Unfortunately, that initiative or those initiatives fell on the deaf ear of our Romanian colleagues. That's it. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I believe that we should save some energy to celebrate our Day of Diplomatic Service and generally to pay some attention to the regular daily work. Thank you. Goodbye.